The rain had started some time before dawn, a thin, persistent drizzle that blanketed the city in gray and seeped through everything: coats, plans, hopes. David Torres pressed the back of his hand to his daughter's forehead again as they sat in the front seat of his aging pickup, parked 2 blocks from the towering glass building of Callahan Frost Financial. Lena stirred beneath her oversized hoodie. Her cheeks flushed, her breathing a soft rasp in the still air. "She's warm," he whispered, mostly to himself. "Too warm." He looked at the time on his cracked phone, 7:38 a.m. If he didn't clock in by 7:55, he'd lose the shift. And losing one more shift meant losing everything. His contract with the building's maintenance vendor was already hanging by a thread. No PTO, no sick leave, no union. Just a clipboard, a tool belt, and the mercy of whoever reviewed his weekly hours. David looked at Lena again, her legs curled under her. She opened her eyes slightly. "Daddy, do I have to go to school?" "Not today, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "We're doing a quiet day." He made a decision. David scooped her into his arms, wrapped her tightly in his faded work jacket, and slipped out of the truck. The cold rain tapped against their shoulders as he jogged across the street, through the underground delivery bay, and into the rear service entrance of the building. Inside, it was warm and sterile: bright lights, white floors, the scent of lemon cleaner, and ambition. He nodded politely to the security guard, who barely looked up. He carried Lena past the boiler room, past the janitorial lockers, and into storage room 3B, a forgotten closet behind the electrical panel. "Stay here, baby," he whispered, laying her on a folded moving blanket. He handed her a thermos of warm water and a half banana. "I'll be just outside. I'll check on you every break." Lena nodded sleepily. "I like it when you're close. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her forehead and stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. By 9:15, David was up on the 19th floor, adjusting an elevator panel that had been glitching for days. He worked quickly, silently, just like he always did. Efficient, invisible, disposable. At 9:27, he got the text that would detonate his day. "Torres, come to conference room A, immediately." Leticia Flores, director of HR. His stomach dropped. Had someone seen him bring Lena in cameras? A complaint? He wiped his hands, smoothed his jacket, and rode the elevator down, each ding echoing like a countdown. When he stepped into the glass-walled conference room, every head turned. Leticia sat at the far end of the polished table spine, ramrod straight eyes already narrowed like a verdict had been passed. "Mr. Torres," she said coolly, "why is your daughter in our building?" David blinked. I didn't have anyone to watch her today." He began, heart thudding. "She's sick. I couldn't leave her home alone." Leticia's voice sliced through his explanation like glass. "This is not a daycare. Our company policy strictly prohibits unauthorized personnel on site, especially children." A few team leads sat along the wall, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke. "She's not a danger," David said softly. "She's just resting. I only needed to finish today's shift policy," Leticia said, "is not a suggestion. You are in breach of security protocol. You are terminated effective immediately." The words landed like a slap. David opened his mouth, closed it again. No one looked at him. No one offered a word. Only the hum of the lights and the gentle tap of rain on the glass walls filled the silence. Leticia stood. "You may collect your things. Security will escort you out." David nodded slowly. He turned and walked away, each step echoing louder than the last. As he exited the conference room, a movement caught his eye. A woman, unfamiliar but striking, stood just outside in the hallway, half-shadowed by a marble pillar. She wore a tailored gray coat and held a closed umbrella in one hand. Her expression was unreadable. Her eyes followed him not with judgment but something else. Something softer. She didn't say a word. David turned away and walked on. He found Lena where he'd left her, shivering slightly but awake. She looked up as he entered. "Are we going now?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. David crouched beside her, nodding. "Yeah, baby. We're leaving." In the rain, he forced a smile. Rain's just sky hugs. We'll be fine." He bundled her up again, and together they stepped back into the freight corridor through the service lobby past the vending machines and the mechanical buzz of forgotten rooms. They exited through the side door. The rain had turned heavier, fat drops now slicing through the cold. David pulled his coat tighter around Lena, shielding her as best he could. "Mama used to sing when it rained," she mumbled, pressing her cheek against his chest. "I liked that." David blinked hard. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. "I remember." As they reached the sidewalk, the street hummed with life people under umbrellas, rushing, clicking heels on wet pavement, not one of them slowing. He looked up, jaw clenched. Behind him, far above on the 20th floor, the woman in the gray coat stood at the window watching. Still silent, still unseen. David took a deep breath and turned away. "I'll find us something," he murmured. "I always do." He didn't see the umbrella in her hand tighten. He didn't see her step back from the glass. But she had seen everything. And she would not forget. The rain kept falling. Not in waves or thunderclaps, but in that relentless, whispering way that soaked a man's resolve, the same way it soaked his socks. David walked with Lena pressed against his chest beneath his coat, her damp hair clinging to his collarbone. She was warm, too warm, and still breathing with that wheezing rasp that never failed to make his heart clench. He kept his eyes low, avoiding the gazes of passing umbrellas of suits and heels and high-speed lives that had no time for a man carrying a child with nowhere to go. They passed a diner. A red neon sign blinked "Open 24/7, flickering like a last-chance heartbeat. David stepped inside, not for food, not yet, but for a moment out of the wet. The hostess gave him a tight smile. She looked at Lena, then back at him. "We're full, sir." Half the booths were empty. David nodded anyway. "Can I just stand here a moment to warm her up? We'll leave right after." She hesitated. 5 minutes. No longer. He whispered a thank you and sat at the edge of a booth, rubbing Lena's back. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed but alert. "I like the smell in here," she said, her voice no louder than a paper scratch. He smiled. "Smells like pancakes and dreams." A soft chuckle escaped her, dry and thin. Then, like a match gone out, her eyes closed again. David turned to the window, staring out at the traffic light blinking red across the misty glass. He didn't notice the woman entering the cafe behind him. She wore a gray wool coat, her umbrella dripping quietly into the holder by the door. She didn't speak, just watched. Waited. When the server came over with a small to-go bag, she pointed discreetly at the pair in the booth. For them, she whispered, "Don't say who." Inside the bag, a grilled cheese sandwich still warm, a bottle of apple juice, and a note scribbled on a napkin. "For the little fighter. Stay warm today." The server handed it to David awkwardly. "Someone left this at the counter. Must have seen your kid." David blinked, surprised. "Are you sure I'm just the messenger?" He opened the bag. Lena stirred, catching the smell. "Is that cheese?" "Looks like someone sent you magic," David said softly. "How lucky are we? I'm the luckiest." Lena mumbled, reaching for the juice. He watched her sip, her cheeks pinking ever so slightly. His throat tightened. Whoever had done this, had seen them, cared. And that was more than most. They kept walking after that. The clouds didn't let up, but neither did David. He carried a manila folder of resumes, wrinkled, water-spotted, and truthfully a little desperate. Each line in it told a story that no one seemed willing to read. Facilities maintenance. 3 years electrical troubleshooting. Certified team lead construction until 2020. But next to it in fine print on every form he filled, "Have you ever been terminated from a prior role?" Yes. And the moment he checked that box, every polite smile turned tight. Every "we'll get back to you" became a silent door closing. They walked to a gas station where he'd seen a hiring sign the week before. The manager took one look at his soggy coat, the sleeping child in his arms, and sighed. "I don't hire people with family baggage," he said plainly. No offense. David didn't respond, just nodded. Understood. Back on the sidewalk, he tried not to let Lena feel the tension in his chest. She'd fallen asleep again, her body limp with exhaustion and fever. He adjusted her weight and pressed his lips to her temple. "We're gonna figure this out," he said. "I don't care how many no's we get." They found temporary refuge in a 24-hour laundromat. The place hummed with the sound of spinning dryers and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. David placed Lena on a bench and tucked his coat over her like a blanket. He sat beside her, head in hands, listening to the rain hit the metal awning outside. Then he heard it footsteps. Soft, deliberate. A woman passed by the window outside. He recognized her, or thought he did. It was hard to tell in the blur of motion and water. She didn't come in, just paused, looking through the glass at Lena at him, and then moved on. He stood up to follow, but hesitated. He couldn't leave Lena alone, and besides, why chase a stranger? He sat back down, and noticed something odd. Next to their bench on the small plastic table sat a box of tissues and a sealed bottle of children's cold medicine. David looked around. No one nearby. No sign of who'd left it. He picked it up. Brand new. Expiration date years ahead. He swallowed hard. An hour later, David found a shelter with a bench under a small overhang just off 3rd Street. He curled Lena into his lap, wrapping them both in what remained of his warmth. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I should have figured this out by now." Lena stirred. Her voice was faint but clear. "I like being with you better than any place, Daddy." Tears blurred his vision. Above them, high in a corner office of a building with no name on the door, the woman from earlier stood with her arms crossed, looking down through rain-streaked glass. She hadn't planned on seeing them again. But now that she had, she couldn't unsee them. And in the girl's wheeze, in the father's stubborn silence. She heard her own past breathing back at her. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind streets slick with yesterday's pain and today's stubborn promise. David sat at the edge of a picnic bench behind a public library, spreading out damp resumes across a plastic sleeve he'd borrowed from the job center bulletin board. He used the last of his napkin stash to blot the corners dry. His eyes scanned the page again. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't pretend, but it was honest. David Torres, skilled technician. Bilingual English, Spanish, punctual. No record. Father. That last word, father, wasn't on the resume, but it was in everything else. Behind him, Lena slept curled on the bench with her head resting on a folded sweater, still feverish, still wheezing softly. Her hair was matted in the back, her socks mismatched, but her tiny fingers still clutched a crumpled sketch of a house with windows and a chimney and 2 stick figures, one big one, small, both smiling. David looked over his shoulder just to be sure she was still breathing smoothly, then stood. He slipped 4 resumes into his backpack, zipped it shut, and walked 2 blocks to the nearest maintenance subcontractor's office. He rang the buzzer. A man in a ball cap opened the door and peered out. "Looking for work," David said quickly. "Any kind. Cleaning repair overnight. I've got experience license, too." The man took the paper, gave it one glance. "You worked for Rexton Facilities?" he asked, already beginning to fold it. 3 years, David said. "Fired last week. I brought my daughter to work. She was sick. No one to watch her." The man paused, frowned. "Yeah, that doesn't look great on a record. HR flags that sort of thing." David nodded. He wasn't surprised anymore. Just tired. The man sighed, handed the resume back. "Try Hartman Janitorial on the East Side. They sometimes take walk-ins. Good luck, man." He returned to the bench. Lena stirred as he sat, her voice a soft croak. "Did we get it?" David smiled gently. "Not this one." She nodded and curled in closer. "It's okay. We'll try the next." That simple trust undid him. He kissed the crown of her head, then reached for her inhaler. Nearly empty. They'd need a refill by tomorrow. He had $18 left. He stared across the parking lot toward the drugstore down the street. Behind it stood a narrow two-story building with a cracked sign that read, Solitude Rivera, Cleaning Services. A paper sign was taped crookedly in the window. Now hiring night staff. No diploma required, David hesitated. He looked at Lena, then back at the sign. He stood. The inside smelled of bleach dust and faint lemon. A narrow desk stood near the door, manned by a young receptionist chewing gum and typing slowly on an ancient keyboard. Application, David asked. She reached under the desk, handed him a form. Bathroom's down the hall if your kid needs it. David blinked. She's not with me right now. She shrugged. Most folks bring their kids here. It's fine long as they stay in the break room. Something in him eased. He sat on a plastic chair in the corner and began filling in the form. Name, David Torres Experience. 8 years electrical janitorial facilities. Previous employer, Rexton Facilities. Reason for leaving his pen hovered. He swallowed. Terminated brought child to sight. He filled it in slowly. Truth had its cost. But hiding hadn't done him much good either. He handed it in, thanked the girl, and walked back toward Lena. What he didn't see, behind a partially open office door on the second-floor mezzanine, a woman was watching. Again. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just watched the man walk out into the daylight holding nothing but an empty water bottle and a quiet dignity that wrapped around him like armor. Later that afternoon, as David and Lena sat outside a convenience store sharing a warm bottle of Gatorade, his phone buzzed. He nearly dropped it. Mr. Torres. This is Elena from Solitude Rivera. Are you available to start tomorrow? His mouth opened, then closed. Yes, he said. Yes, absolutely. There's something else, Elena continued. We understand you may have your daughter with you at times. As long as she's in the break room and stays safe, that's allowed. Just keep her out of active work zones. David blinked, stunned. You're serious? Yes, sir. We're serious. We've been where you are. He hung up and turned to Lena, who was now sitting cross-legged on the pavement, drawing circles in the dust with a straw. We got the job, he said. She looked up, blinking. Her face cracked into a grin. We got it. We got it. He pulled her into his arms, spinning her once carefully. She coughed in surprise, then laughed a high, breathy giggle that shook loose some of the heaviness in his chest. As they sat on the curb sharing the rest of the drink, a man in a gray van across the street pulled away. He was the supply driver for Solitude Rivera and had seen David there earlier. And in a corner office upstairs once again, the woman stood. The same one who had seen them in the rain. The cafe, the laundromat. But this time she wasn't watching with distance. This time she was taking notes. This time she was preparing to step closer. Not yet, but soon. Because some stories need time to unfold. And some kindnesses are best given when the person receiving them has proven they were never waiting to be rescued. David's first night on the job felt like stepping into a forgotten world. The building was old but functional, its polished floors whispering of long hours and small victories, its fluorescent lights flickering just enough to remind you nothing in life was perfect. The cleaning crew at Solitude Rivera operated like a quiet heartbeat after business hours, unseen but vital. And David, he fit right in. He wore his uniform like a second skin. Blue work shirt, name tag slightly crooked dark slacks too loose around the waist. He'd lost weight over the past weeks, though he hadn't noticed until he saw himself in the break room mirror. Lena sat curled on a beanbag chair in the corner, nibbling crackers, her blanket tucked around her like a shield. A donated tablet played gentle cartoons at low volume. She looked up every now and then, giving him a thumbs up as he walked past with a mop or empty trash bin. He worked fast, carefully, without complaint. He scrubbed floors, sanitized restrooms, vacuumed long corridors, and never once slowed unless it was to glance back at his daughter. That night around 10:45 p.m., something unusual happened. He was buffing the hallway tiles on the executive level of floor they were only occasionally assigned when he heard the unmistakable click of high heels echoing down the hallway. He looked up, startled. A woman in a dark gray pantsuit turned the corner. Tall, confident, her face unreadable but familiar. Too familiar. He recognized her not just from a single moment, but from several. The blurred glimpses outside the diner, the laundromat window, even a faint memory of her near the park weeks ago. She had been there just at the edges. She stopped a few feet from him. "You cleaned this floor already?" she asked, voice cool but not cold. "Just finishing up, ma'am," he replied, moving the buffer aside. She nodded. "I've seen you before." He froze. She didn't smile, didn't soften, but she didn't look away either. "I'm Claire Hartwell," she said simply. "I oversee several of the companies we contract with." David's heart dropped. So this was someone important. Dangerous, maybe. The kind of person who had the power to give or take in a single sentence. "I hope everything's been satisfactory," he said carefully. Claire tilted her head. "You're not just a janitor." He blinked. "No, ma'am. Yes, I am. Right now I am." You weren't always," she said. "Your hands, your posture. You used to lead people. It wasn't a question." David nodded slowly. Facilities team lead, then a shift manager. Until... Well, I got fired. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" He hesitated, but something in her expression made him tell the truth. "My daughter had a fever. Daycare closed. No family. I brought her with me to work. I kept her safe. Didn't let her near any danger or equipment. But someone reported it, and they let you go. They didn't even ask why David said." His voice wasn't bitter, just worn. Policy's policy. Claire was silent. The hallway buzzed softly with the electric hum of lights. "You didn't try to appeal?" she asked. He gave a dry smile. "Tried. But HR didn't care. I didn't have a voice that mattered." Claire looked past him down the hallway, then back again. "You do now," she said quietly. David frowned. "I'm sorry," but she didn't explain. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like punctuation. That weekend, David worked a double shift. Lena's fever had broken, but her cough lingered, and he was saving for her next pediatric visit. They'd found a tiny sublet, a basement room in a retired teacher's home, who charged them less than market rent because the little girl reminds me of my granddaughter. It was small, damp, and not very pretty, but to Lena it was a castle. She drew a flower on the wall with her crayons and labeled it Home. David watched her sleep that night on a real mattress for the first time in weeks. He didn't cry, but his hands trembled when he reached to adjust her blanket. Monday morning came with unexpected news. At the end of his shift, the HR lead at Solunas Rivera handed him a sealed envelope. "Upper admin wants you to see this," she said. "No idea what it's about." David opened it cautiously. Inside was a simple letter. "Mr. Torres, your work has been noticed. We'd like to offer you a trial supervisory position overseeing the rotating night crews at 3 buildings, including the Hartwell Tech Center. This position includes benefits. We'd like to discuss more in person. C.H. Claire Hartwell." He sat on the edge of the bench in the break room, letter in hand, heart pounding. Lena looked up from her coloring book. "Is it a good letter?" David smiled, wide, unguarded, real. "It's a very good letter." But what David didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Claire had gone home that night after their conversation and pulled out a dusty box from her closet. Inside, an old employee badge from 1996, a janitor's uniform, a photo of her at 8 years old sitting behind a mop cart bundled in a coat too big for her tiny frame, and a letter from a former boss. "You don't belong in the shadows. Find your light." She had carried that with her through every promotion, every sleepless night in boardrooms full of people who never knew her story. Until she met someone who reminded her why she'd never forgotten it. and why maybe it was finally time to give someone else the chance she once so desperately needed. David stood outside the Hartwell Tech Center, the letter still folded in the inside pocket of his work jacket worn thin at the elbows. A drizzle freckled the pavement. Behind him, Lena twirled in her too big raincoat, pretending the building was a castle and she was a royal inspector there to check if the floors sparkled. "I'll be back soon, okay," he said, kneeling to her eye level. "You stay with Ms. Dolores in the break room. She's got snacks." Lena gave him a mock salute. "Yes, Captain." He couldn't help but smile. Every step forward lately felt like dragging a mountain with him, but Lena made it lighter. She always did. Inside the executive wing, David felt the difference immediately. Carpets thick enough to hush your doubts. Glass walls so clean they looked invisible. A receptionist with sharp eyeliner and sharper eyes offered him coffee. He declined. "Miss Hartwell will be with you shortly," she said. He nodded and waited on a leather couch that probably cost more than his entire car. But the moment Claire walked in, everything else faded. She didn't wear the intimidating suit today, just a navy blouse and slacks, no makeup, and a tired but genuine smile. She motioned for him to follow her into a quiet conference room. "Mr. Torres," she said, folding her arms gently. "Thank you for coming." Of course, David replied, still unsure whether to sit or stand. Claire gestured to the seat across from her. He sat. "I'm not going to bury the lead," she said. "You've been recommended by multiple staff for the open night crew supervisor position. That's not common. Most hires come from within." David tried to find words. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Claire said. Then after a pause, "And if it helps, it comes with benefits. Medical dental. For dependents, too." David exhaled slowly, the air shaky in his lungs. "Look," he said, his voice quieter now, "I've worked hard my whole life. Not always smart, maybe, but always hard. I've cleaned hospitals after night shifts, repaired heating units in 100-degree basements, mopped up messes no one talks about. But I've never felt like anyone was watching. Like it mattered." Claire didn't blink. "It did," she said. "And it does." Then she reached under the table and slid over a red folder. Inside, neatly printed on cream paper, was a file labeled Torres David Observation and Recommendation Notes, initiated by Claire Hartwell. David stared at it. "You've been watching me?" he asked, not with fear, but confusion. "Not spying," Claire said. "Observing. Ever since that night outside Rexton. You probably didn't see me. I was leaving late. You were walking away with your daughter holding her like she was glass and lightning at once." David's throat tightened. Claire continued. "I followed you. Not to interfere. Just to remember. Because a long time ago, someone watched me walk home from a janitorial shift with my little brother asleep on my back. Someone believed in me before I could spell the word ambition, and I never got to pay that forward." David sat back in stunned silence. "You're offering me this job because I remind you of you?" he asked softly. Claire shook her head. "I'm offering it to you because you've earned it." The resemblance. "That's just the part that makes me need to." The room held its breath between them. "I won't let you down," David said. "I know." That night, David didn't tell Lena everything just that he might be getting a promotion. She jumped into his arms and made him pinky promise that if he became a boss, he wouldn't be too serious to still make pancakes in funny shapes. He promised. And when she fell asleep on their mattress curled against a stuffed bear missing one eye, David sat quietly at the edge of the bed, rereading the letter from Claire and the observation notes again and again. The kindness that had shadowed him wasn't luck, it was choice, and it had a face now. At work, things changed quickly. Supervising 3 buildings wasn't easy. The staff varied wildly. Young people juggling 2 jobs, retired veterans trying to stay active, single mothers who clocked in after putting their kids to sleep. David saw them all, understood them. He implemented rotating shifts to help parents get home early. He arranged weekend potlucks on site to ease the loneliness night workers often carried. He kept a locked drawer filled with extra baby wipes, granola bars, and dollar store socks. People started calling it the kindness drawer. Claire stopped by once a week. She never stayed long, just walked the floors, greeted staff, left handwritten thank you notes tucked into lockers. David noticed every gesture. So did others. One day, weeks later, he found a note in his locker. "You changed the way this place feels. You made me believe it wasn't just about work, but about being seen. Thank you for giving us that." It wasn't signed. He didn't need it to be. Kindness didn't always wear a name tag. And sometimes the most powerful transformations start not with grand gestures, but with someone quietly noticing and then choosing not to walk away. David folded the note, carefully slipped it into the same red folder Claire had once given him. He labeled the folder, now Kindness File, and in it he started collecting more than papers. He collected every quiet reminder that even in a world that often looked away, someone watching with empathy can change everything. The first time David brought Lena to the main building after being officially promoted, she held his hand tighter than usual. The sun had just started rising behind the high rises of downtown, casting long, gold-tipped shadows across the pavement. For the first time in weeks, the morning didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like a beginning. "Are we allowed to go in the front door now?" Lena whispered, eyeing the revolving glass entrance. David grinned. "Guess we are." As they walked inside, David noticed the receptionist, the same one who had once glanced at him like he didn't belong, now offering Lena a sticker with a warm smile. A butterfly. Lena placed it proudly on her tiny jacket. Claire was waiting near the elevator. She wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, a simple cardigan and dark jeans made her look less like an executive and more like someone's thoughtful older sister. The look on her face when she saw Lena was the softest David had ever seen from her. "Good morning," she said to both of them. Lena hesitated, then reached into her pocket and handed Claire a folded piece of paper. "I made you a picture. It's you, me, and Daddy. You're smiling." Claire unfolded it, 3 stick figures all holding hands under what looked like a huge yellow sun and a tall building with a heart on top. Claire blinked quickly, then smiled. "Thank you, Lena. This is perfect." She crouched beside the girl and whispered something David couldn't hear. Lena nodded solemnly, then skipped off toward the break room, humming. Claire rose. "She's beautiful. She's my whole world," David said, watching her go. There was a pause before Claire spoke again. "You know, we don't often get a chance to rewrite the stories we come from. But sometimes life gives us a pen again." David nodded slowly. And a clean page. The following weeks passed in a blur of purposeful motion. David dove into the role with quiet determination, building bridges between departments, listening more than he spoke, and always leading by example. He wasn't trying to climb any ladder, he just wanted to make the floor solid for others to stand on. One afternoon, he found a newer janitor, Michael, barely 19, asleep beside a supply closet, clearly exhausted. David didn't yell. Instead, he sat down beside him and asked him what was going on. Michael's eyes welled up. "My mom's in chemo. I'm working nights here and delivering food during the day. I'm trying, but I'm so tired." David helped adjust his schedule to something humane, started a quiet donation pool among the staff, and gave the boy a ride home when he didn't have one. It wasn't charity. It was what someone once did for him in their own way. And in the background of it all, Claire kept appearing. Always just when he didn't expect her, offering a cup of coffee, dropping by with notes, sometimes just watching from the back during a staff meeting. She never brought up her past. Never explained more. But one Friday night, everything shifted. It started with a phone call. David was finishing paperwork when the security desk rang through. "Mr. Torres, there's a woman asking for you. Says it's personal." Confused, David made his way down and found Claire standing by the lobby window, staring out into the rain. She looked different. Vulnerable, somehow. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. David walked closer. "Are you okay?" Claire didn't answer right away. She stared out at the storm for another moment before turning to face him. "My father was a janitor," she said, "single parent. We used to clean office buildings just like this at night. I did homework in the supply closets, ate dinner from vending machines. I hated the smell of bleach because it meant we'd be here until 2 a.m. David stood silently. "He lost jobs because of me," she continued. "One night I fell asleep under a desk in an executive suite. A man found me and told my father we were a liability. He was fired the next morning." David's breath caught. "I remember standing in the rain that day," Claire said, voice tight, holding my dad's hand, thinking, if I ever got powerful enough I'd find people like him, like me, and do it differently. David exhaled slowly. "You were that kid." Claire nodded. "I was." The rain drummed harder against the glass. "I saw you that night outside Rexton," she added. "You didn't see me, but the way you held your daughter." I remembered my father's hands, calloused, gentle, always holding me like I was the only thing keeping him standing. David swallowed hard. He had no words, just the ache in his chest that told him something sacred had just been shared. Claire stepped closer. "I didn't help you out of pity, David," she said. "I helped because someone once gave me a chance when the world didn't, and I've been looking for the right person to pay that forward to." She looked away, then smiled softly. "Turns out..." He was already holding the mop. That night, David walked home in the rain with Lena sleeping against his shoulder, her cheek pressed to his collarbone. His jacket was soaked, his shoes squished with each step. But he didn't care, because for the first time in a long time he wasn't walking into the dark. He was walking toward something. And behind him, far above, a light remained on in Claire's corner office, not because anyone forgot, but because someone was still watching. Still believing, still remembering what it means to hold the hand of someone you once were, and never, ever let go. Claire stood in front of the long, narrow window of her office, staring down at the street below. The city buzzed in its usual rhythm, cars inching forward, umbrellas blooming under the drizzle, and people weaving between sidewalk puddles like they had somewhere better to be. But her eyes weren't on the crowd. They were searching for one figure, a man in a worn jacket and a little girl with a bounce in her step. When she finally spotted them, something in her chest eased. She watched as David lifted Lena into his arms just to avoid a puddle and carried her the rest of the way with a laugh that echoed through the glass. Claire's hand slowly lowered the blinds. Still watching came a voice behind her. It was Dolores, her longtime assistant and only real confidant in the office. Claire turned. "Habit, I guess." Dolores smiled knowingly and walked in, placing a folder on the desk. "This is more than habit, Claire." Claire didn't answer. She sat, glancing down at the folder, Community Programs Internal Staff Uplift Proposal. The draft David had worked on after hours, building on his idea to formalize support systems for night shift employees, rotating childcare hours, food assistance referrals, even optional mentorships. "What do you see in him?" Dolores asked gently. Claire looked up. "Everything I once needed." Dolores paused. "You ever think he might need more than just a professional opportunity?" Claire's gaze dropped to the folder again. Her voice softened. "I think he needs someone who doesn't walk away." Downstairs, David moved through the janitorial wing like someone who finally knew where he belonged. He checked timesheets, replaced a faulty supply scanner, and even fixed a broken coffee machine with a paperclip and a prayer. He didn't know why Claire's confession had stayed with him so deeply. But every time he looked at her now, he didn't just see the CEO who had offered him a job. He saw the girl who had once stood in the rain holding her father's hand and built an empire from that memory. But something inside him kept whispering, "Don't get too close." It wasn't fear. It was survival. He'd spent so many years making sure Lena had everything she needed, even when that meant keeping the world out. Love was a luxury. Trust was a risk. But then Claire had looked at him not like a boss, not like a benefactor, but like an equal, a kindred soul. And David didn't know what to do with that. Later that night, after Lena had gone to bed, snuggled into her blanket fort with her drawing book and a flashlight, David sat at the kitchen table staring at the proposal he'd written. His handwriting was still rough around the edges, but the ideas were solid, real, needed. He glanced across the room where Lena's backpack lay open, crayons spilling out like confetti. One drawing caught his eye. 3 figures again, this time under a tree. The same 3 stick people, but this time Claire had a crown. David chuckled under his breath. She was royalty to Lena the Queen, who saved their castle. And maybe, just maybe, something more to him, too. The next morning, David arrived at work early to finalize logistics for a Saturday cleanup event he'd volunteered to organize, a way to get staff involved with the community while earning bonus hours. But when he reached the bulletin board, something stopped him cold. Pinned there under the event flyer was a smaller sheet of paper. Typed, clean, quiet. Meet me on the rooftop at 6:15 p.m. C.H. His stomach flipped. At 6:13 he was already waiting, heart-racing hands jammed into his coat pockets. The rooftop was quiet, a small urban garden nestled behind solar panels and HVAC units, one of those hidden perks executives never talked about. Claire arrived 2 minutes later, hair pulled back, coat flaring behind her in the soft evening wind. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked to the railing and looked out. David joined her in silence. Then, softly, she asked, "What's the scariest thing you've had to face as a father?" David didn't hesitate. Failing her. Claire nodded slowly. Same. He turned to her, confused. "My brother," she said. "I raised him after our father died. He was 12. I was barely out of college. I wasn't ready, but I had no choice." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of years she rarely spoke of. "I missed parent-teacher meetings. I forgot birthdays. I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to be everything he needed." David said nothing. He knew that kind of guilt. The kind that didn't raise its voice, just stayed quietly in the background, reminding you could have done better. Claire turned to him. "I see the way you are with Lena. How she laughs louder when you're near. How she looks for your face before she does anything new. You're not failing her, David. You're giving her a story she'll carry into every room she ever walks into." David's throat tightened. And then she stepped closer. "I'm not asking for anything from you," she said. "Not out of gratitude. Not because I offered you a job. But if there's space in your life, not just as a father or as an employee, but as a man, I'd like to stand in that space." David looked at her, truly looked. He saw the rain-soaked girl, the iron-willed executive, the woman who had reached back in time, not just to pull someone forward, but to meet them where they stood. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the invisible thread between 2 people who had spent years trying to protect others and maybe finally found someone who could protect them too. He didn't answer with words, just reached out and gently took her hand. And for once, neither of them had to be strong alone. The following Monday began like any other. Lena had insisted on wearing her lucky shoes, a pair of pink sneakers that lit up when she walked. David chuckled as he knelt to tie the laces. "You know you're going to blind someone in the elevator, right?" She grinned. "Then they'll be happy. Lights make people smile." He couldn't argue with that logic. At work, Claire was already in motion, navigating a gauntlet of meetings and internal strategy sessions. She wore that usual poise of hers, but there was a softness under it now, like someone walking through the world, not just thinking about numbers, but about hearts. She glanced out the window more than once that morning, and each time she hoped the man with the warm eyes and quiet strength would glance up too. At 10:47 a.m. everything changed. A fire alarm blared from the east wing of the building. People spilled from conference rooms and cubicles, confused but not panicked. Protocol was followed: orderly exits, head counts, safety checks. David had been on the 3rd floor inspecting new mop inventory when he heard the alert. Within seconds, he'd slung his radio over his shoulder and moved toward the stairwell. By the time he reached the second-floor hallway, the smoke detectors had gone off and a shrill cry rose above the din. A child's cry. He knew instantly. Lena. Backtracking through the thinning hallway, he found her near the admin daycare center, pressed against the wall, eyes wide with fear. The daycare staff had already evacuated, but somehow Lena had darted back in looking for her crayon box. "Daddy," she cried, arms outstretched. Without a word, he scooped her up and shielded her face with his jacket. Smoke was beginning to creep from one of the side storage rooms, just a wiring short, he guessed, but enough to cloud vision and panic the senses. He moved quickly, years of janitorial familiarity guiding his steps, knowing which hallways dead-ended and which ones doubled as emergency exits. When he burst through the east stairwell, Lena clinging to him like a koala, a wave of relief swept over him until he heard a voice yell from above. "There's still someone on 5." Instinct kicked in. David passed Lena to a waiting security officer and turned back without hesitation. The building's upper floors weren't in flames yet, but every second counted. Claire had been coordinating with emergency response teams outside when she saw David disappear back into the building. "No," she shouted, but it was too late. People saw her expression change. The calm corporate executive now looked like someone whose entire world had just walked back into danger. 15 minutes crawled by, then 20. A few smoke-touched employees stumbled out, a shaken intern, a coughing maintenance worker, but no David. Claire stood frozen. Every memory, every quiet moment they'd shared replayed in her mind like still frames from a reel that might end too soon. And then the doors burst open. David emerged, soot-streaked shirt torn at the shoulder, carrying an older employee, Janine, the accounts payable lead, in his arms. The crowd gasped. Claire didn't. She exhaled finally, and her hand went to her mouth, eyes filling. He laid Janine gently on the paramedic's stretcher and turned, expecting silence. Instead, the crowd applauded. It wasn't loud, it wasn't orchestrated, but it was real. That afternoon, the office buzzed in a way it hadn't in years. No one was talking about deadlines or stock options. They were talking about the janitor who ran back into a building for someone who wasn't his daughter, someone he barely knew. They were talking about David Torres. By 3 p.m., someone had posted a photo of the moment he carried Janine out, snapped by an intern. By 6 p.m., it had gone viral within the company intranet, captioned, "Sometimes the strongest ones wear aprons, not suits." Claire printed the image and quietly slipped it into a folder labeled Future Leadership. That evening, David sat on the worn couch in his apartment, arms wrapped around Lena, who had fallen asleep mid-cartoon. Claire stood at the open door. "You didn't have to go back in," she said softly. "I couldn't not go," he replied. "That's somebody's mom. Somebody's everything." She stepped closer. "You didn't just save her, David. You reminded people what real leadership looks like." He looked away. "I'm just a janitor." "No," she said, her voice low but sure. "You're the kind of person I want this company to be proud of. And the kind I—" She stopped herself. David met her eyes, and this time it wasn't a silent understanding. It was a confession neither of them needed to complete. That night, long after Lena had been tucked in and the city's lights shimmered like stars spilled across asphalt, David stepped onto his tiny balcony. Claire joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea. The world still spun, but in that moment, for once, it didn't feel like it was spinning without them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 people who had carried more than their share of weight, and finally found someone to carry it with. Because sometimes the heroes weren't in capes or corner offices. Sometimes they were the ones with calloused hands and soft hearts. And sometimes the world noticed just in time. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the east-facing windows of the office building, painting golden streaks across the marble floor. The lobby buzzed with whispers, not of deals or deadlines, but of David. People who had never noticed him before now offered nod smiles, even coffee. Some clapped him on the back as he passed. The same uniform he wore every day now seemed to carry weight, not invisibility. But David remained quiet. polite, grateful, humble. His only concern that morning had been Lena's scraped knee from the chaos the day before. She was fine, bandaged, and smiling. But it reminded him how fragile things still were. One misstep, one accident, and everything could change. That's why when Claire's assistant told him she wanted to see him in her office, his gut twisted. Now he asked. She said she cleared her schedule. That wasn't normal. Claire stood by her window again when he entered, but this time she didn't wait for him to speak. She turned immediately and handed him a folder. Her eyes searched his. David opened it slowly. At the top was a letter, embossed with the company's logo. Offer of promotion. Director of Facilities and Community Engagement. He blinked, scanned the page again. His salary tripled. Benefits extended. Child care support. A private office. And below that, a note in Claire's own handwriting. I believe in what you're building. I want the world to see it. He looked up, stunned. Claire, I'm not. You are, she interrupted, gently but firmly. You don't see it yet, but everyone else does. The janitor who stepped up and carried someone from the fire. That wasn't luck. That was you. The man who stayed late, submitted proposals, remembered every face and name in this building. That's you. David's throat tightened. I never finished college, he said quietly. I've never led a team. I don't wear a suit. Claire stepped forward. Neither did my father. She said, her voice softer now. But he led me through the darkest years of my life. And when he died, I spent every day trying to become someone he would have been proud of. You remind me of him. David looked away, overwhelmed. Why me, Claire? Why now? There was a long pause before she spoke again. Because I was that kid. He froze. She walked past her desk, lifted a photograph from her bookshelf and handed it to him. A faded image, a little girl no older than Lena holding hands with a man in a janitor's uniform. Both were drenched in rain, but they were laughing. Behind them, a small building with a flickering neon sign, Mercy Diner. He used to take me there when we couldn't afford the heating bill. We'd share one plate of fries and he'd draw smiley faces in the ketchup. That's how I remember feeling safe. Her voice caught slightly. He brought me to work with him once when I was sick. His boss saw us and fired him on the spot. David's eyes widened. Claire nodded. We spent 3 nights in a motel after that using coins he'd saved in a jar labeled Hope. Her voice steadied again. When I saw you that day carrying Lena rushing to explain yourself to security, I didn't see an employee. I saw him. I saw me. I followed you that afternoon. I watched you leave that building with dignity, even when it hurt. And I knew I had to find a way to make it right, not just for you, but for every kid like I was. David looked at her speechless. His chest felt tight with a mix of awe, emotion, and something else rising, slowly recognition. Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I needed you to know you earned this on your own. The silence between them was full, but not heavy. David set the photo down. You didn't just make it right, Claire. You made it matter. They stood there for a long moment. No titles, no walls, just 2 souls who'd carried pain in different shapes and had somehow met in the middle. Then Claire smiled gently. So, Director Torres, shall we change a few things together? He chuckled softly. Only if I get to bring my tool belt. That night, David sat with Lena on the edge of her bed. She was coloring again, this time with new markers Claire had sent as a surprise. What's that? He asked, pointing to her drawing. She held it up proudly. A picture of their apartment, but brighter. Flowers in the window. 3 stick figures again, her David. And Claire now holding both their hands. She's happy, Lena said, as if narrating for a stranger. Because she's not alone anymore. David kissed the top of her head. Neither are we, sweetheart. Across town, Claire stood on her own balcony, staring at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt like her father would be proud not just of what she'd built, but of how she was building it now. Her phone buzzed. A message from David. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing us." She typed back slowly, carefully. "I didn't just see you. I recognized you." She paused, then added, "And I'm not walking away." In the stillness of the night, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of healing beginning to take root. A janitor no more. A girl no longer waiting. A company about to be led not just by strategy, but by compassion. And at the center of it all, one man, one child, and one woman who had once been that kid, who now held the power to rewrite what dignity and leadership looked like together. The day David officially started as Director of Facilities and Community Engagement. He arrived in the same uniform he'd worn for the past 3 years, creased khakis, steel-toed boots, and a plain button-down shirt. But something in his posture had shifted. His shoulders were straighter, his steps quieter but more certain. He wasn't there to play a part. He was there to be one. Claire met him by the elevator on the executive floor. No grand announcement, no staged photo op, just a quiet nod and a smile that said, "This is exactly where you're meant to be." "You sure about this title?" David had asked her once. "It's a mouthful." Claire had smiled. "You're not just running facilities anymore, David. You're rebuilding how people feel when they walk through those doors." By noon, the shift had already begun. He sat in on a departmental meeting where junior staff actually spoke voices, trembling at first, then growing stronger as he nodded and jotted notes. When someone brought up a broken AC vent that had been ignored for months, he didn't deflect. He pulled out his phone, typed it into a work order system, and said, "We'll handle this by end of day. You have my word." A stunned silence, then applause. Not because the AC would be fixed, but because someone listened. Later that week, David launched a new initiative, Humans First. A series of employee-led lunches, anonymous feedback boxes, and monthly spotlight stories to highlight overlooked team members, cafeteria staff, security guards, mailroom workers. It was Claire's idea originally, but it was David who brought it to life. He called the first meeting himself, inviting a dozen employees from across departments. At the center of the table sat Lena's old teddy bear dressed in a tiny paper name tag, Hope. The room chuckled, but they also listened. And for the first time in years, people looked at each other not through titles but through stories. David's transformation didn't come without challenges. Some executives raised eyebrows behind closed doors. A janitor in a leadership meeting. Does he even have a college degree? Is this diversity, or just pity in disguise? Claire shut it down. In one boardroom during a particularly tense quarterly review, an older VP questioned David's qualifications. Claire leaned forward, locking eyes with the man. "Tell me," she said coolly, "when was the last time you carried someone out of a burning building?" The room fell silent. David didn't gloat. He never had. He simply leaned in and said, "I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here to make sure the next person who walks in with a dream doesn't leave feeling invisible." That was the moment the tide turned. Outside the office, life changed too. Lena thrived in her new school. She had friends, now art supplies that weren't shared from a public bin, and teachers who called her bright, not behind. David picked her up every day at 3:15 sharp, sometimes with a smoothie, sometimes with news about a leaky pipe he'd fixed, but always with a smile. Claire came by some afternoons, usually with a second smoothie, and Lena, without asking, always offered her the first sip. One Friday evening, David invited Claire and her assistant to dinner at a small restaurant tucked between two laundromats. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. A place Lena called Our Victory Spot. They ordered fries, shared stories, and laughed over spilled ketchup. Then Lena, ever observant, turned to Claire and said, "You don't wear heels when you're with us." Claire looked down at her simple flats, then back at the little girl. "Guess I don't need them here," she said. David chuckled. "She's got a way of stripping down your walls." Claire's eyes met his. "I think that's exactly what I needed." Later that night, as David walked Claire to her car, the air warm, and still he paused. "You know," he said, voice low, "I used to think love was for people who had time for it, who didn't have to worry about rent or lunch money, or if their kid would get teased for second-hand shoes." Claire turned slowly, and now he exhaled. "Now I think maybe love is for the ones who never stopped showing up anyway." She stepped closer, even if they're covered in mop water and drywall dust. He grinned, especially then. They didn't kiss, not yet, but as she reached for his hand and he let her, something quieter, deeper passed between them. Respect, recognition, and hope. Back at home, Lena had left a drawing on the fridge. 3 figures again, this time with a heart over their heads, and in big, colorful letters, "Sometimes families aren't found. They're made." David stared at it long after Lena had gone to sleep, and he realized maybe this wasn't just a new chapter. Maybe this was the book he'd always wanted to write now with someone who knew the pages before he ever turned them. Because love wasn't about timing. It was about presence, about the people who saw you when you were invisible, and chose to stay. It had been exactly 1 year since that morning, since the security guard's raised hand, since the quiet shame of walking out with his daughter in his arms and the cruel finality of the word terminated. And yet, standing at the front of the community room now wearing a button-down shirt that Lena had chosen, hair trimmed slightly better, and heart steady, David Torres didn't feel like the man who once begged for a second chance. He felt like the man who gave them. The walls around him buzzed with life staff from every department, their families, retired employees, even a few new hires who had heard the janitor's story and come just to see if it was true. Claire stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame, a soft smile playing on her lips. Lena sat cross-legged in the front row, a paper sign taped to her chest that read, "My dad's the boss, and my hero." The room quieted as David stepped to the small podium. No mic, no teleprompter, just a simple note card in his hand and a heart too full to hide. He cleared his throat. "I'm not gonna lie. I've stood in this building soaked in rain, covered in bleach once with gum on my shoe and once with a sandwich stuck in my back pocket. But today, I stand in gratitude." Laughter rippled softly. David glanced at Claire. Her eyes were on him, steady, proud. "I used to believe that people like me didn't belong in places like this. That once the world labels you maintenance or just a dad, you keep your head down and stay out of the way. But then something happened. Something small. Something big. All at once." He looked toward Lena. "Someone believed in me." His voice cracked just enough to make every person in the room lean forward. "I wasn't given this role because I wore the right tie or had the perfect resume. I was given it because someone saw the kind of leader who doesn't leave, who stays when the hallway floods, who shows up after they're told not to, who holds a child's hand tighter when everything's falling apart." He folded the card and put it in his pocket. "And today, if I can leave you with anything, it's this: we all carry keys. Not just to open doors for ourselves, but to unlock someone else's future. You may never know the weight a smile lifts, or how far a kind word carries. But believe me, sometimes that's the miracle. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, of hearts opening, of walls falling, of seeds being planted." Claire was the first to stand. The room followed one by one until everyone was on their feet. No music played, no confetti dropped. But it didn't need to. This was a standing ovation, not for a title but for a life rebuilt one choice at a time. That night, David and Claire sat outside the modest brownstone he now called home, one he'd bought with his first bonus, not because it was flashy but because it had a porch where Lena could paint sunsets. The summer air was soft, filled with fireflies and the faint hum of distant laughter from neighboring yards. Claire held a glass of sweet tea in one hand, her other wrapped around David's. He broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about that day? The fire alarm, the chaos, security pushing me out?" She nodded slowly. I think about what would have happened if I'd walked away." He looked at her. "But you didn't." "No," she said gently, "because I knew what it felt like to be you, and I knew what it meant to be seen." They were quiet a moment more. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. "David, I think I love your daughter's drawings more than any painting I've ever bought." He smiled. "That's good, because there's a whole stack of family portraits she's planning to hang in your apartment." Claire chuckled softly. "She already assigned me a favorite color and a superhero nickname. She told me, David said, 'You're Captain Calm.'" She laughed again, an easy, full sound that made something settle inside him. Not excitement, not butterflies. Something truer. Peace. Inside, Lena had fallen asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around a pillow shaped like a golden star. Her bedtime book, The Invisible Boy, lay open beside her. She had underlined a line in pencil, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to write in books, "When someone sees you, you're not invisible anymore." David knelt beside her and kissed her forehead, then gently lifted her in his arms and carried her to bed. As he pulled the blanket over her and turned off the light, he hesitated, then turned it back on. Just the small nightlight shaped like a moon. He left it glowing. Not because she was afraid of the dark, but because she wasn't anymore. As David stepped back outside, Claire reached for his hand again. "What made you leave it on?" she asked. He smiled. "Because sometimes we don't just need to be seen once. We need someone to keep the light on until we can find the switch ourselves." She nodded, eyes glistening. Then slowly she leaned in. And this time, finally they kissed. Not as boss and employee. Not even as two people healing, but as two lights left on for each other. In the distance, the city moved as it always had. But for David, Claire, and Lena, something had shifted forever. Not in noise, but in hope. Because love, when born from kindness, doesn't just change a story. It rewrites the ending. Sometimes the people who save us don't raise their voice. They just raise an umbrella. And sometimes the most unexpected love grows from a single act of silent grace. That's what happened here in the story of a man who was fired for bringing his little girl to work, and a woman who saw herself in that child, because once she was that kid. What would you have done in Maya's place, or Jake's? Have you ever crossed paths with someone who reminded you of your younger self? Someone you just couldn't walk away from? Let us know where you're watching from and what part of this story touched you most. Single dad gave CPR to a collapsed jogger. She woke up and whispered, "I'm your new boss." The sky over Portland had just begun to pale, the morning still wrapped in a shroud of mist. Streetlights blinked against the retreating night and a soft drizzle clung to the air like breath on glass. Jake Miller adjusted the zipper on his hoodie, the fabric still warm from his overnight shift repairing elevator panels in one of Beacon Lux's older hotels. His feet ached, his back throbbed, but the run was non-negotiable. It was the only time he could outrun the ghosts. His daughter Sophie had been quiet that morning. She always was on Thursdays. That was the day her mother used to pack her lunch with little paper notes until the notes stopped. Until the woman who wrote them collapsed in their living room 3 years ago, blue-lipped and silent while Jake fumbled with 911 and did nothing else. He hadn't known how to save her. He never forgot that. Now, every Thursday after dropping Sophie at school, he ran. Not to stay in shape. Not really. It was a penance and maybe a prayer to become someone better. The path through Tanglewood Park wound like a sleepy serpent curling under trees just waking from autumn slumber. His feet thudded against damp pavement in rhythm, his breath sharp in his throat. Just ahead, a lone jogger, slender-billed ponytail swinging, pace crisp. He registered her the way any tired man does distantly. Not important. Just another early riser. But then she faltered. At first it looked like a misstep, an ankle twist perhaps. She slowed, brought a hand to her ribs. Then she staggered sideways into the grass, knees buckling as if gravity had suddenly turned cruel. Her body folded limp. Jake stopped running. For a split second, everything froze. The air thickened. The scene mirrored another one, the color draining from a woman's face, fingers twitching, eyes wide with terror. Not again. He sprinted toward her. "Ma'am." "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, dropping to his knees beside her. No response. He touched her shoulder, then her neck cold. He turned her gently. Her skin was ashen, her lips tinged blue. He couldn't feel a pulse. His throat closed. Not again. Not again. Hands trembling, he yanked out his phone. No signal. Of course. This part of the park always dropped calls. He looked around. Empty paths. No joggers, no cyclists, no early dog walkers. His heart slammed in his chest. Think Jake. Do something. He tilted her chin, checked her airway. No obstruction. His brain called up the training videos he'd obsessed over after Marcy died. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat. Focus. He placed his hands on her chest and began the compressions. 1, 2, 3. He counted aloud, trying to keep the tempo. Her ribs pushed back under his palms, then gave a little. He didn't stop. His breath came harder now, both from exertion and panic. "Come on," he murmured. "Don't you quit on me. Not today. 30 compressions." He leaned down, gave 2 breaths. Her chest rose faintly. Still nothing. He repeated the sequence. Again. By the 3rd round, his arms were shaking. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Please don't do this." A spasm. Then a gurgled inhale. Her body jerked beneath his hands. She coughed violently, eyes flying open with wild confusion. She gasped again, rolling slightly to her side. Jake fell back on his heels, his arms trembling with the rush of adrenaline. "You're okay," he panted. "You're okay. Just breathe." The woman blinked, vision blurry. Her chest heaved. She focused on him, sweat-soaked, breathing hard mud on his knees. Her lips moved, barely audible. What he asked, leaning closer. She coughed again, then whispered hoarse and strange, "I'm your new boss." Jake stared at her. "What?" But her eyes fluttered closed again, not unconscious this time, just drained, overwhelmed. Sirens echoed distantly through the park. Someone must have finally spotted them. He sat beside her, soaked in sweat, chilled to the bone, watching the woman he'd just pulled back from the edge of death. My new boss. No way, but even as doubt flickered through him, a cold certainty formed. There had been rumors about new management at Beacon Lux, a new CEO, out of state. No one had seen her yet. And now this woman with the sleek ponytail, the expensive runner's watch, and those commanding features, she didn't look like someone who got up at dawn to jog without reason. Jake's heart thudded again, but for an entirely different reason. Because if she really was the new boss, he just saved the life of the one person who had the power to change his own. And she didn't even know his name. Jake sat hunched at the kitchen table, the soft click of the wall clock echoing louder than it should. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting pale light across the scratched wooden surface. Sophie, 8 years old and always too observant, was coloring quietly across from him, her knees tucked under a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She hadn't said much since they got home from school. Thursdays were like that. Jake hated Thursdays. He watched her hand move slowly across the page, outlining a figure with wings and messy hair. "Is that an angel?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded, but didn't look up. "It's Mom," she said. Jake's throat closed. He reached for his mug. Cold coffee. He hadn't even realized he poured it. Sophie glanced up at him, then tilting her head in that way she did when she was working up the courage to ask something heavy. "If you had known CPR when Mom got sick, would she have lived?" Jake flinched like he'd been struck. He couldn't lie to her. Not Sophie. "I don't know, baby," he said, voice low. "Gravel thick? Maybe." She looked down again, nodding slowly. "But now you know it right." "Yeah," he said. "I do." She didn't speak again, but he saw it in her eyes, some quiet shift. a puzzle piece fitting into place. That's how Sophie processed grief slowly inwardly, like a secret language no one else was allowed to hear. He didn't tell her what happened that morning in the park, didn't tell her that the woman he saved might be the reason he didn't get the job transfer last week, didn't tell her that when she opened her eyes and said, "I'm your new boss," his stomach had dropped not from fear, but from the strange collision of fate and irony. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jake stood at the kitchen counter staring at the email still glowing on his phone. The subject line read, "Beacon Lux Staffing Decision. Application Status Update." He had read it 3 times already, but each word still felt like a slap. "Thank you for your interest. At this time, we have chosen a candidate whose qualifications better align with our current staffing needs." He scrolled down his thumb, brushing the screen like it could change something. He had applied to move to the daytime maintenance supervisor role. Better hours, benefits, no more late-night scrambling for childcare. Sophie could sleep normal hours. He could be a real dad again. But the rejection came 2 nights ago, and now, like some cosmic joke, he might have saved the life of the very person who signed off on that denial. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn Hart lay in a quiet hospital room, lit only by the soft glow of a monitor and the flicker of muted news from a wall-mounted television. She wasn't watching. Her mind was looping one moment over and over. The park, the blur of light, her chest burning, the weight on her ribs, the voice counting out compressions, and then those eyes, concerned, exhausted, familiar somehow, though she knew they had never met. A knock on the door broke her trance. Her assistant, Melanie, stepped in holding a manila folder and a to-go coffee tray. "You really should be resting," Melanie said, setting the coffee down. "But I figured you wouldn't." Evelyn gave a small smile. "You know me well." Melanie handed over the folder. "You asked for the top 10 maintenance staff profiles, starting with night crews, from Beacon Lux, Portland." Evelyn opened the folder and froze. There he was. Jacob Miller, current role overnight repair technician, part-time. Previous employment contractor. Education high school diploma, 1 technical certification. Application status. Denied for promotion. Insufficient supervisory experience. She stared at the profile photo. Same worn eyes, same heavy brow, a man who looked like he carried too much weight for 1 pair of shoulders. "This is him," she said quietly. Melanie frowned. "The guy who saved you?" Evelyn nodded. "Want me to flag him for HR?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet. I want to meet him again first. At work." Melanie hesitated. "You sure? That's a pretty big gesture." Evelyn leaned back, a strange ache in her ribs, reminding her of how close she'd come to not being here. "I'm not sure of anything right now," she said, "except that I owe that man my life, and that maybe I was wrong about more than just 1 file." Back at Jake's apartment, he stood at the small window overlooking the dim parking lot, watching the flicker of rain under a lone street lamp. A half-done drawing of Sophie and her mom was taped to the fridge behind him. In the photo next to it, Jake's wife, Marcy, was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He touched the edge of the picture with calloused fingers. "I did better today," he whispered. He didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But he knew one thing. When the woman he saved opened her eyes and looked at him like he mattered, like he wasn't invisible, a small part of him, long dormant, had stirred awake. Hope. Real, trembling hope, and that was something he hadn't felt in years. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was oddly soothing. Evelyn Hart lay still, her eyes half closed against the afternoon light creeping in through the hospital blinds. She hated hospitals always had. The sterile smell, the way time folded into itself inside the walls like the world outside, had paused, but no one told you. But today she didn't mind it as much, because she was alive. And that was something she hadn't taken for granted. Until yesterday. Her ribs still ached with every breath. CPR did that, apparently. She'd read it in textbooks, heard it in staff briefings, but it was different. feeling the echo of someone's desperate effort pressing life back into your chest. Real. Human. She remembered the man's face vividly now. Strong jaw, concerned eyes, a sweat-streaked brow. Not a stranger in the moment, but something more, something familiar, almost grounding. A knock tapped softly on the door. "Come in," she said. Melanie entered heels, clicking softly against the tile, carrying two things: a sleek laptop and a small paper bag that smelled like real food. Smuggled in a sandwich. Turkey and Havarti. They've got you on enough IV fluids to drown a person. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You always know what matters." Melanie perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. "Doctor says you're doing better than expected. Might be out of here tomorrow." Evelyn nodded absently, gaze already shifting to the laptop as Melanie opened it and turned the screen toward her. "You asked for the staffing shortlist. Night crew applicants. This is everyone who's applied for permanent daytime roles in the last 30 days. Evelyn clicked through the files, slowly scanning familiar formats: name, photo, position, status, rejection notes. Then she stopped. Jacob Miller. She didn't need to read the rest right away. One glance at the grainy badge photo and she knew. It was him, the man who'd knelt beside her, who'd saved her life. Her breath caught not from pain but from the collision of gratitude and disbelief. She read the file again, this time slowly. Part-time overnight maintenance technician, high reliability scores, single-parent status noted in HR remarks, recent application to daytime supervisory position denied, reason limited formal education, no direct management experience. "Was this signed off last week?" she asked. Melanie nodded. "By interim leadership. Before you arrived." Evelyn stared at the rejection note. Cold, clinical. She'd seen 1,000 like it. She'd even written many herself. Efficiency, metrics, structure, all the polished words that kept companies moving. But none of those words had been gasping for air in a field yesterday. None of them had held her life in shaking hands and refused to let go. She leaned back, closing her eyes. "I don't want anyone to reach out to him. Not yet." Melanie frowned. "You sure you don't think it would mean something? You just—" "I want to see him in his own world. First," Evelyn interrupted gently, "where he doesn't feel like someone's watching. I want to understand how I didn't see him before, how we miss people like him." Melanie gave a reluctant nod and stood. "Well, you'll have a chance soon. Your first full site visit scheduled for Beacon Lux Portland this Friday. Ground inspection, staff meet and greet." Evelyn arched a brow. "That fast?" "You insisted on transparency and leadership on the floor, remember?" Melanie smirked. "You wrote the playbook." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I did, didn't I?" But the smile faded as Melanie left and the door clicked shut behind her. The room was quiet again, and Evelyn sat in that silence not as a CEO but as a woman who'd nearly died, and had been brought back not by power, not by policy, but by compassion. Across town, Jake stood inside the supply closet of the Beacon Lux Hotel, checking a clipboard with smudged fingerprints and ink circles around half the entries. His hands were still scraped from the morning's ductwork job. One of the air handler units on the rooftop had blown out, and the elevator control panel on the east wing kept blinking fault for no apparent reason. It was a standard Thursday, tired, thankless, necessary. He took a sip of cold coffee from a thermos that had seen better days, then headed toward the elevator shaft toolbox swinging from one hand. The hallway was pristine polished marble floors, minimalist art pieces, LED sconces humming gently. Everything about the hotel screamed intentional luxury, except maybe the maintenance guy with oil on his collar. Jake crouched by the panel, his mind drifting. "I'm your new boss." The words had rung in his ears since the park. He hadn't told anyone. Not even Miguel, the only coworker who didn't pretend Jake didn't exist. Part of him wasn't sure it had really happened, and part of him feared that if she remembered him, it might not change anything. He wasn't a resume standout. No college degree, no fancy credentials. Just a guy who showed up, fixed things, and clocked out, who went home to a daughter and tried to make her believe the world was still good. He'd applied for the daytime shift not because he wanted to climb, but because he needed to be present for Sophie. School pickups, homework help, a decent bedtime. He didn't want to chase prestige. He just wanted to be there when she needed him. But Beacon Lux didn't care about bedtime stories. Jake sighed, closing the panel and tightening the last screw. As he stood up, he didn't notice the elevator doors down the hall slide open, or the tall woman stepping out flanked by her assistant and 2 mid-level managers in suits. Evelyn Hart stopped mid-step when she saw him, her heart catching in her chest. He looked just like he had that morning, tired, focused, unaware of anyone watching. Only now the fluorescent hallway lights flickered off his shoulders like armor. Melanie whispered, "That's him." "Right." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to, because something had shifted inside her, something unspoken and profound. And for the first time in years she felt the sting of humility, the realization that sometimes the people who carry the most weight are the easiest to overlook. She stepped forward, but not to speak yet. She wanted to see him, really see him first. And when the moment was right, she'd make sure he knew. She remembered everything. The Beacon Lux lobby was a masterpiece of understatement. Clean lines, warm wood accents, and soft jazz floating through the air like invisible perfume. Guests with designer luggage glided across polished floors while staff offered practice smiles, never breaking rhythm. Jake didn't belong here. Not really. He stepped out of the service hallway with a mop handle in one hand and a wrench sticking from his back pocket, sweat clinging to his temples. The suit-clad guests didn't even glance his way. That was the job: stay invisible, fix things before anyone notices they're broken. "Hey, Miller," a voice called. Jake turned. It was Russell Hines, operations manager. Late 40s, gelled hair smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jake straightened slightly. "Morning." Russell looked him over. "Air handler on 5 still giving us trouble. Should be back online within the hour." Russell nodded slowly. "That's good. Try not to use the guest elevators in the meantime. We've got corporate upstairs." Jake gave a clipped nod. "Understood." Russell lingered, eyes sharp. "Big visit today. New leadership wants to shake hands with the staff. Word is the new CEO might actually step foot into the boiler room. Imagine that." There was a faint smirk on his lips as he turned and walked away, but Jake didn't take the bait. He'd been around long enough to know how this worked. Upper management made appearances, handed out lukewarm praise, and disappeared behind mirrored doors again. He didn't expect anything different. Still, as he headed back into the staff corridor, something buzzed low in his gut like a wire humming before it sparked. Evelyn walked the hallways of the hotel slowly, her heels muffled against plush carpet. Every wall, every corner spoke of design decisions she had once signed off from 1,000 miles away. Now it felt foreign. She stopped outside the maintenance wing, flanked by Melanie and Russell. "I want to see where the repair staff works," Evelyn said. Russell hesitated, then forced a smile. "Of course, just keep in mind, ma'am, it's not exactly guest-facing." "Neither are heart valves," Evelyn replied. "Still pretty critical." Melanie gave a small stifled chuckle. Russell cleared his throat and opened the door. The hallway changed instantly. Gone were the soft lights and scented air. The tile here was utilitarian, the air laced with machine oil and faint traces of bleach. But it was honest, grounded. They passed a narrow office space where 2 techs hunched over schematics. Further down, a half-open door revealed a man in coveralls bent over an electrical panel. Evelyn's steps slowed. It was Jake. He didn't see her yet. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with grime, a pencil tucked behind his ear. There was a rhythm to the way he worked, focused, methodical. The kind of precision that didn't come from degrees but from years of repetition, failure, adjustment. "Leave us," Evelyn said quietly. Russell blinked. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak with him alone." Russell hesitated, then gave a tight nod and motioned for Melanie to follow. Of course. When the hallway cleared, Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't say his name, just waited. Jake felt the presence before he heard it. He turned startled, expecting a guest who'd wandered into the wrong hallway. Instead, he froze. It was her. Hair swept back. A tailored blazer. Those same eyes, clear, intelligent, and now fixed directly on him. "You," he breathed, barely audible. Evelyn gave a soft smile. "Me?" Jake wiped his hands on his pants, suddenly too aware of the dirt, the sweat, the cheap thermos perched beside the panel. I didn't know if you remembered," she offered. He nodded. "I do," she said gently. "All of it." Silence pressed between them for a moment. Then Evelyn took a step closer. "I read your file," she said. "Saw your application. Your rejection." Jake's jaw tensed. "It's fine. I wasn't qualified. That's not the word I'd use." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied, quickly uneasy. "I didn't do what I did because of your title. I didn't even know who you were." "I know," she said softly. "That's exactly why it matters." Jake shifted his weight. "Look, I'm just trying to do my job. That's all." "Is it?" Evelyn asked, tilting her head. "Because from where I'm standing, you did more than a job. You saved a life. Mine. And then you walked away like it didn't mean anything." Jake's eyes dropped to the floor. It meant something he said quietly. It meant everything. "But I'm not looking for a favor." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Neither am I. I'm looking for people who make this place work. And I've realized we've built a system that rewards polish over substance, titles over integrity. That needs to change." Jake met her gaze then, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, the spark of something unspoken. "I want to know more about what you do here," she said. "The real work. Show me." Jake hesitated. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, then winced. "Okay, maybe wrong phrasing. But yes." He cracked a reluctant smile, the first real one she'd seen on his face. "Well," he said, grabbing the thermos. "First thing you should know, nothing in this building is ever actually fixed. We're just always buying time." "I can work with that," Evelyn replied. As they disappeared down the hallway together, the stark divide between suits and overalls, boardroom and boiler room began quietly to dissolve. And for the first time, both of them felt it. Something was changing. Not just policies, not just job titles, but something deeper. And it had started with an act of kindness neither of them saw coming. The hallways of Beacon Lux shimmered with quiet opulence. Golden sconces lined the walls like sentinels of elegance, their glow warm and intentional, just enough to make every guest feel like the star of their own story. But down a service corridor behind the East Wing ballroom, a flickering light bulb interrupted the illusion. It buzzed every few seconds, struggling against its own obsolescence. Jake stood beneath it on a metal stepladder, wrench in hand, shoulders tense from holding the same position for 20 minutes. His phone buzzed again on the floor next to him, and this time he cursed under his breath. He climbed down, checked the screen. Voicemail from the school. Again. Jake tapped the message and pressed the phone to his ear. Sophie's principal, calm and professional as always, informed him that his daughter had been held past dismissal due to a substitute bus driver mix-up. She was safe and waiting in the main office. Jake glanced at his watch. Already an hour past school end. He squeezed his eyes shut. It had been his biggest fear when applying for the day shift that he wouldn't be able to balance everything. And now, here he was running on caffeine and adrenaline, trying to keep elevators from shorting out while his daughter sat alone under fluorescent lights waiting for a ride that never came. He grabbed his bag and hurried toward the maintenance office where Miguel, his only real friend at work, sat eating chips straight from the bag. "Cover for me," Jake said, breathless. 15 minutes. Miguel looked up. "Kid, trouble." Jake nodded. Miguel didn't hesitate. "Go." Sophie sat curled in a too-big-chair backpack at her feet, hugging a well-loved stuffed rabbit. She looked up when Jake rushed in, breath caught in his chest. "Hey, bug," he said softly. She didn't cry, didn't pout, just gave a small smile and reached for his hand. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to stay so long." Jake knelt in front of her, brushing her hair back. "It's not your fault. I should have been there." She looked at him solemn. "You work really hard." The words hit harder than he expected. "I do," he said. "But I'm trying to fix that." Later that evening, Sophie sat cross-legged on a pile of old blankets inside the Beacon Lux basement utility room. She sipped cocoa from a styrofoam cup while drawing dinosaurs on the back of a discarded service log. Jake had managed to coax a space heater into life near the wall, and the faint hum filled the silence. He watched her from a distance while checking a faulty water pressure valve. Bringing her here hadn't been the plan, but childcare was thin, and she didn't want to go to the neighbors again. So he did what parents do when the world doesn't bend. He made space where there was none. A knock startled him. He turned and froze. Evelyn stood in the doorway holding a folder and a to-go bag. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she stepped inside. "I brought the revised shift proposal," she began, then stopped, noticing Sophie. Jake moved quickly, blocking her view. "Sorry, she's just here for a little bit. Won't be a distraction." Evelyn peered around him. "Is this—" Sophie, Jake stiffened. "Yes, she's beautiful," Evelyn said, smiling gently. "Hi there." Sophie looked up, blinking. "Hi." Evelyn lowered herself to Sophie's level, mindful of her heels. "I like your rabbit." Sophie offered it up. "His name's Captain Crumbs." Evelyn chuckled. "That's a strong name. I bet he's brave." "He's very quiet," Sophie said. "Well, quiet people can still be strong." Jake stood awkwardly, unsure how to bridge the moment. "She won't be here long." "I just needed to Jake," Evelyn said, rising. "I'm not here to reprimand you." He nodded slowly. She handed him the folder. "This is the modified position outline. A hybrid role, split shifts, flexible clock-ins, based on your feedback." Jake looked down at it, heart-thudding. "You'd let me make my own hours." "Within reason," she replied. "So long as the work gets done, and I've seen enough to trust that it will." Jake stared at the pages, stunned. "This doesn't usually happen," he said. "I know," Evelyn replied, "but it should." They stood in silence a beat longer than needed. Then Sophie called out, "Dad, the light." "Over there's flickering." Jake sighed. "It's probably the ballast again. I'll fix it." Evelyn looked toward the corner. "Do you mind if I help?" Jake blinked. "You want to fix a light?" She shrugged. "You said you wanted me to see the real work." He grabbed another step stool and handed her a pair of safety glasses. "You ever used a screwdriver before? I've managed a boardroom. How hard can this be?" Minutes later, she stood on the stool, awkwardly holding the casing while Jake pointed at a wire. "That's your ground. Don't touch that. Got it." Sophie watched them from her blanket fort, smiling. "Are you guys friends now?" she asked innocently. Evelyn looked down at Jake, then at Sophie. "I hope so," she said. Jake didn't reply. But for the first time in a long time, something inside him loosened. Not just respect, but warmth. Connection. And under the hum of wires and the glow of repaired light, something began to shift, not just in the building, but in the space between them. Something quietly beautiful. Something like trust. The next morning, Evelyn sat at the head of a long oak conference table surrounded by the department heads of Beacon Lux. The room was all glass and angles perched on the top floor like a throne above the city. From here you could see bridges stretching across the river rooftops wrapped in morning fog. But Evelyn wasn't looking at the view. She was watching Russell Hines, who stood confidently at the far end, laser pointer in hand, presenting his weekly performance charts like a trial lawyer before a jury. And as you can see, Russell said, clicking to the next slide, maintenance response time dropped by 8% this quarter. We're below benchmark for 3 of our 4 sites. That trend reflects the inconsistency we see when underqualified staff are promoted into roles they're not equipped to handle. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She could feel where this was going. The tone, the implication. Russell clicked again. Now I understand the push for internal development, but I want to caution against allowing sentiment to override standards. We've got policies in place for a reason. Evelyn steepled her fingers, her voice calm. Are you referring to a specific promotion? Mr. Hines Russell didn't flinch. I'm referring to the conversation about reclassifying part-time staff into supervisory hybrid roles. We need consistency, proven credentials, experience. Silence settled. Then Evelyn replied, steady and deliberate. I agree, Russell. We do need consistency, which is exactly why we need to reassess what qualifies as proven. She leaned forward. You know what else dropped in that same quarter, she asked? Guest complaints related to repair issues. Because even while working overtime understaffed and without benefits, our night techs have been keeping this building from falling apart. Russell blinked. Yes, but that's not the same as… It's not the same, she interrupted. It's more. It's hands-on problem-solving, emotional regulation in high-stress conditions, and… She paused, voice tightening slightly, the presence of mind to respond to emergency medical situations when no one else does. A few heads turned. Melanie, seated quietly beside her, gave a slow, approving nod. Russell cleared his throat. I just think we should be careful about setting precedents. Evelyn smiled razor-sharp. That's exactly what I intend to do. Set a new precedent. An hour later, Jake walked through the service corridor, toolbox in hand, completely unaware of the storm that had just rolled through the executive suite. He'd barely slept. His mind had been reeling all night about Evelyn offering him flexibility, about Sophie being forced to spend her evenings in utility rooms, about how the woman he'd once saved was now choosing to show up, again and again, not just as a boss, but as something else. A knock startled him as he reached his station. It was Russell, clipboard clutched tightly. Got a job for you, Russell said, voice clipped. A pipe burst in the VIP suite. Jake frowned. Upstairs, you heard me. Russell held out the order. You'll be shadowed. Jake hesitated. Shadowed new policy. Russell said, not hiding his smirk. Evaluation rounds. Got to make sure our more unconventional hires are up to company standard. Jake took the form, jaw clenched. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't about evaluation. It was about intimidation. The VIP suite was quiet when Jake arrived, high ceiling, soft, ambient lighting, and imported tile that looked like it cost more than his truck. The leak was behind the guest bathroom wall. He got to work silently aware of the figure watching from the doorway. Evelyn. She hadn't announced herself, but he knew it was her. He didn't turn, just kept tightening the valve. You always this quiet when you work? She asked. Jake exhaled. Only when someone's trying to decide if I'm worth the risk. There was a pause. Then, you're not a risk to me, Jake. You're a reminder. He turned finally. Of what she stepped into the room. No clipboard, no pretense. That everything I was taught to value degrees, suits, polish, none of it brought me back when I collapsed in that park. Her voice softened, but a man in a hoodie with scraped hands did. Jake looked away. I'm not some hero, Evelyn. I was scared out of my mind. I almost didn't even know what to do. But you did, she said. That's the point. He stared at her, then something unspoken passing between them again, fragile as thread. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people from different worlds meeting on a bridge of shared imperfection. Evelyn stepped closer. Tell me what you'd change, she said. Jake blinked. What in this place? If you had the chance. Don't filter. Don't defer. Just say it. Jake hesitated, then shrugged. I'd stop treating maintenance like background noise. Give people full-time status if they're showing up like it. Pay for certification classes. Get rid of the culture where the guys with tools feel like they have to disappear when executives walk in. Evelyn's eyes didn't leave his. Noted. And she meant it. That night, Evelyn returned to her hotel suite. She stood at the window staring down at the quiet hum of the city. She thought of her first year in business school, how she was taught to lead with numbers, never feelings. Yet, none of those metrics had saved her that morning in the park. A pair of rough hands had. She poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and pulled out Jake's original application. It didn't list Ivy League schools or elite internships, but it had notes in the margin from HR: always punctual, never complains, works overtime when others refuse, polite, doesn't escalate conflicts. In short, the kind of employee who holds the whole place together quietly. Evelyn circled one line with her pen, then wrote 2 words in the margin beside it: rescue-worthy. Only this time she was the one preparing to do the saving, not just of Jake's career, but of a system that had forgotten how to see the people holding it up. Jake stood at the kitchen counter, shoulders hunched, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The apartment was still. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with her sketch pad resting on her chest, her bunny tucked beneath her arm like a little talisman of safety. The television murmured quietly in the background, casting a gentle blue glow across the worn carpet. His eyes were fixed on the envelope in his hand. It wasn't bulky, just a few sheets of paper inside, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Earlier that afternoon, Evelyn had slipped it to him after his shift ended. No grand announcement, no audience, just her and Jake standing in the alley behind the hotel where delivery trucks rumbled past and pigeons fought over breadcrumbs. "This is yours," she'd said simply. "Read it when you're ready." Now he wasn't sure he'd ever be. Jake peeled the flap back slowly, breath held. He unfolded the documents: a formal offer of employment, full-time salaried hybrid hours, health benefits, paid training for additional certifications, and the title Senior Facilities Supervisor. He blinked at the words. It didn't feel real, until he reached the end and saw her signature, Evelyn Hart, CEO, written in her sharp, deliberate hand. The mug slipped from his fingers and hit the sink with a thud. He rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by 1,000 tangled thoughts. This was everything he'd asked for, everything Sophie needed, a life raft in the middle of a sea he'd been treading for too long. So why was he hesitating? At dawn, he walked Sophie to school. She skipped alongside him, swinging her lunchbox, humming something from a cartoon he didn't recognize. The morning air was crisp, touched with the smell of wet leaves and coffee from the corner cart. "Dad," she asked halfway to the gate, "do you think I could ever be a boss like that lady with the nice shoes?" Jake smiled despite himself. "You mean Evelyn?" Sophie nodded. "She's really pretty. And she listens." Jake stopped walking. He looked down at his daughter, bright-eyed, hopeful, sharp as ever. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She does." Sophie tilted her head. "Are you gonna say yes?" Jake hesitated. To what he asked, testing her. "The new job. The one that lets you come to my class play. You keep thinking about it like your eyebrows are broken." Jake laughed, covering his mouth. "Yeah, I guess I do that." Sophie stepped closer and took his hand. "You don't have to be scared, Dad. You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork." He looked at her, his heart twisting. And that's when he realized what the fear really was, not about failing the job or stepping into something new. It was about being seen, truly seen, not just as a worker in the background, but as a man who mattered, a father trying his best, a person worthy of investment. That kind of visibility was exhilarating and terrifying. Later that day, Jake returned to Beacon Luck's contract in hand throat tight. He passed the lobby with its marble and gold, past the concierge, who finally nodded at him like he was more than just the maintenance guy, and headed toward the executive floor, somewhere he'd never been, not once in all his years of working here. Evelyn's office was sleek modern. Glass walls, a low couch in the corner, a single-framed photo on her desk, her and a younger brother, both in hiking boots, grinning at the summit of some forgotten mountain. She stood when he entered. "I read it," Jake said, holding the contract. She didn't speak, just waited. He exhaled. I want to say yes. I do, but I need to ask you something. Of course. Why me? The question hung in the air. Evelyn crossed her arms, her voice soft but unwavering. Because you've been doing more than your job for a long time and no one bothered to notice. Because you think like a leader, but carry yourself like a servant. Because when everything went wrong, your instinct was to act, not to ask who was watching. She paused. And because Sophie deserves to see that people like her father are worth betting on. Jake swallowed hard. That's a good answer, he said, voice thick. Then let me ask you something, Evelyn said gently. Why are you still afraid? He looked down, flexing his fingers. Because if I mess this up, it's not just me who falls. Evelyn stepped forward, reaching for the contract. Then we build it so you don't have to carry the whole weight alone. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Jake realized that the offer she'd made wasn't just about a promotion or a paycheck. It was about trust. She was offering him a place in the story, not as a background character, but as someone who could help rewrite it. He took the pen she handed him and signed his name. That night at home, he found Sophie drawing again. This time it was a hotel with a rainbow over it and 3 little stick figures beneath. One tall with a toolbox, one medium with heels, one small with a rabbit. Jake knelt beside her. What's this one? Sophie beamed. That's you. That's the lady boss. And that's me. We all work at the hotel now. He stared at the page, warmth blooming in his chest like a light finally flicked on. You know what he said? What I think that's my favorite picture yet. And for the first time in a very long time, Jake Miller felt like maybe he was exactly where he was meant to be. The clanging of metal pipes echoed through the basement hallway like distant thunder. Jake bent over a faulty valve, tightening a rusted coupling while sweat dripped from his brow. It was barely 10 a.m., and the new role, only 3 days old, already felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too big. He'd been promoted. He had a title now. But most days it still felt like he was pretending, navigating meetings, juggling repairs, answering emails filled with acronyms he hadn't seen since high school. And today, things had gone wrong. Very wrong. He heard the elevator ding above him and knew without checking Russell had arrived. Jake cursed under his breath, wiped his hands on his jeans, and straightened just as the man himself strode into the mechanical room, expression smug and tight-lipped. Senior Facilities Supervisor Russell greeted voice-dripping sarcasm. Nice title. Shame about the blacked-out East Wing. Jake flinched. I'm working on it. Are you? Russell gestured sharply behind him. Because half of our VIP guests just filed service complaints. Lights flickering, room temperatures fluctuating. That's not minor. Jake tried to keep his voice level. It's a cascade fault. The building's wiring is outdated. If you want the full solution, we need to replace the relay junctions, not just patch them. Ah, Russell smirked. So the solution is spending thousands of dollars and weeks of downtime. Sounds like someone's angling to make excuses instead of taking responsibility. Jake's jaw tightened. I'm not making excuses. I've logged every work order, and I've stayed overtime every night this week. Russell stepped closer. Let me tell you what I see: someone who got bumped up because the CEO got sentimental, and now the system's cracking, just like I warned. Jake's hands clenched at his sides. His chest burned not just from anger but from the weight of every invisible pressure pressing down on him. Sophie's school tuition, the car's failing transmission, the look in Evelyn's eyes when she handed him that contract. I'm doing everything I can, Jake said through gritted teeth. Maybe everything you can just isn't enough, Russell shot back. For a beat, silence pulsed between them. Then Jake turned, walked past him and out into the hallway. He needed air. Real air. Not fluorescent lights and recycled HVAC frustration. He passed the lobby without looking at anyone, stepped out into the alley behind the building, and braced his hands on his knees. His mind spiraled. Maybe Russell's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this job was meant for someone with a degree, a resume, a polished suit, and the right vocabulary. Then he remembered Sophie's words. You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork. But in this moment, it didn't feel like enough. Back upstairs, Evelyn scrolled through her inbox when Melanie rushed in. There's an issue, she said, serious. What kind of issue? Russell cornered Jake downstairs. Words spreading staff are talking. Apparently, Russell implied Jake's promotion was a favor. Morale's shaking. Evelyn stood, fury tightening behind her ribs. Where's Jake now? He left the floor. No one's seen him for 20 minutes. Evelyn grabbed her coat. Clear my next 2 hours. She found him near the loading dock, sitting on an overturned bucket behind a stack of cleaning supplies. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes on the pavement. She didn't speak right away, just stepped into the quiet with him. Finally, he looked up. Should have known better than to think I could carry this. You're not supposed to carry it alone, she said. He let out a bitter chuckle. That's easy to say from your chair. Evelyn sat beside him, ignoring the dust and cold. You think I haven't been called names behind my back? That I didn't hear people whisper that I only got this job because my father was a real estate legend? Jake turned to her surprised. My first month on the job, she continued, one of my regional VPs introduced me at a meeting and said, This is our new CEO. Don't worry, she looks young, but she's got bite. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Jake's gaze dropped. What did you do? I rewrote every policy they used to keep quiet employees buried. Then I promoted the night shift janitor to daytime floor supervisor after I saw him de-escalate a panicked guest better than 3 managers combined. Jake snorted. That sounds familiar. Evelyn smiled. Jake, you didn't get this job because I owed you. You got it because you earned it. And yes, Russell's pushing back. He's scared. Of what? Of the fact that someone like you who leads with integrity and action challenges everything people like him hide behind. Jake stared ahead, brow furrowed. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had HR pull the maintenance logs. Do you know how many issues you resolved last week? He shrugged. 17. Personally, including 3, no one else noticed. Jake blinked. You didn't fail today. You exposed a weakness the system's been ignoring for years. And if you'll walk back in there with me, I'll make sure everyone knows that. He looked at her, something softening behind his eyes. I don't want to fight. This isn't a fight, she said. It's a shift. That afternoon, Evelyn called an all-staff meeting, something rarely done midweek. Employees filled the break room, curious, uneasy. Russell stood in the back, arms crossed. Jake stood near the door, unsure whether to step forward. Evelyn didn't wait. I want to address the electrical outage, she said, and I want to thank the man who identified a decades-old systems flaw and prevented a larger failure. She turned to Jake. Jake Miller didn't cause a breakdown. He caught one. And starting next quarter, he'll lead a facilities modernization team to rebuild what should have been replaced years ago. Gasps, murmurs, then applause. Jake flushed, stunned. Melanie beamed. Russell turned pale. Evelyn met Jake's eyes as the room applauded louder. And for the first time since that morning in the park, he didn't feel like a man who'd merely survived something. He felt like someone who had changed something. The apartment was quiet that night. Not tired quiet or end-of-day quiet, but the kind that lingers after something big happens. A stillness wrapped in reflection. Jake sat on the couch, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the top button left open like a small rebellion against everything he'd carried all day. Sophie lay curled beside him, her head on his shoulder, a bedtime story resting forgotten in her lap. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass, the city humming its lullaby of passing cars and distant voices. I heard you clapped today, Sophie said softly. Jake looked down, smiling. You heard Mr. Miguel texted me. Said you saved the building. Jake chuckled. That's a bit dramatic. Sophie tilted her head. But you fixed something important. I pointed out something broken. That's all. That's kind of the same." He paused. It wasn't about the lights or the outage. It was about the silence, the quiet neglect that came from years of looking at problems and thinking, "That's just the way it is." Jake had always fixed what he could reach. But now, for the first time, he had the tools and the authority to fix what others had chosen to ignore. Sophie stirred beside him, then sat up, cross-legged, her face serious in the dim light. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She toyed with the edge of her sleeve. "Do you ever wish you hadn't helped that lady in the park?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked. "What I mean?" Sophie hesitated, struggling to shape the thought. "If you didn't help her, maybe none of this would have happened. You wouldn't be so busy now. You wouldn't be working late or getting in trouble with mean guys like Mr. Russell. You wouldn't be so tired." Jake stared at her, then gently reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sophie," he said, "I've never not for 1 second regretted helping her." "But what if everything gets too hard?" she asked. "What if people don't like you being the boss? What if it all goes back to how it was before?" Jake thought for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty only a father can manage. "If I hadn't helped her," he said, "I might have kept my head down forever. I might have told myself I didn't matter, that showing up was enough. But that moment, it reminded me that doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, still changes the world." Sophie looked at him with wide eyes. "Even if the world's really big?" He smiled. "Especially then." They sat like that for a while, her head resting on his chest again, his hand gently stroking her hair. The TV flickered in silence, a paused screensaver casting soft colors on the walls. Eventually she murmured, "I think she was meant to fall near you, Dad." He swallowed against the lump in his throat. "Maybe I was meant to be there for her." The next morning, Jake arrived early, too early, even for a maintenance supervisor. The lobby was still waking up, lights flickering on one by one, front desk yawning behind smiles, fresh flowers arriving from the delivery truck. He walked the halls slowly, not with the anxiety of a man out of place, but the steady gaze of someone who finally owned his purpose. Evelyn was already in her office reviewing project timelines for the facility's modernization task force. She looked up as he knocked on the glass wall. "You're early," she said, standing. "Couldn't sleep." She gestured for him to come in. Jake sat, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "This is a blueprint I drew up last night. Just ideas for emergency protocols. Clearer signage in the stairwells, maybe some bilingual notices. I figured if we're going to do this right, we should start from the ground up." Evelyn studied the sketch. Hand-drawn, neat block letters, little notes in the margins. Thoughtful. Real. "I like it," she said. "It's human. Practical." Jake shrugged. "That's how I think." "Don't change that," she said softly. "I've sat through enough presentations with buzzwords and pivot strategies. I'd rather work with someone who understands what it's like when a wire fails at midnight." Jake smiled faintly. "Appreciate that." They were quiet for a moment. Then Evelyn leaned against her desk. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "You helped me when I was vulnerable. Not because you wanted anything, but because it was right." He nodded slowly. "Well, now it's my turn to help you do the same for others," she said. "This modernization plan. It's not just wires and panels. It's dignity, and I want you to lead it." Jake blinked. "You want me to form a team, train them, work with HR, build a new standard for how this place treats the people who keep it running." He stared at her, heart thudding. "And if I mess up?" he asked, voice raw. Evelyn smiled. "Then we fix it, like everything else." That afternoon, Jake passed Russell in the hallway. The man looked away first. He didn't smirk, didn't speak. Jake didn't need him to. He had something better than approval. He had a daughter who believed in him, a boss who backed him, a job that reflected the man he'd become. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a janitor patching leaks in the dark. He felt like a builder, of systems, of second chances, of something that might finally last. The staff lounge buzzed with low conversation as Jake stepped inside, holding a folder thick with schematics and hand-drawn notes. A whiteboard behind him listed tasks for the week, some scribbled in sharp black marker, others already crossed out. The room was busier than usual, the air charged with something between curiosity and hope. A few weeks ago, no one would have expected the hotel's facilities staff to be gathering for anything more than coffee and quick instructions. Today, they had a meeting with the CEO. Evelyn Hart stood by the far window, coffee in hand sleeves rolled up. No blazer, no assistant shadowing her, no pretense. She looked comfortable, present. Miguel leaned toward Jake. "You sure she's serious about all this?" Jake offered a half smile. "You've met her, haven't you?" Miguel chuckled. "Good point." Evelyn turned, signaling for the room's attention. The hum quieted instantly. "Thanks for showing up," she began. "I know it's not every day corporate invites you to speak freely, and I know it's not always easy to believe when leadership says, 'We're listening.' But I'm here to tell you, we are." She paused, glancing around the room. "We've been running this hotel on outdated equipment and outdated thinking. Both need to change. So today isn't about presentations, it's about perspective. I want to hear what's really happening behind the walls, what you need, what's broken." For a beat, no one spoke. Then one hand rose. It was Carla, an HVAC tech who'd worked there for 9 years. Her voice was firm. "We need tools that aren't 20 years old. We spend half our time trying to fix our equipment just so we can start fixing the real problems." Another tech chimed in. "We've been patching insulation with duct tape." Someone else. "The supply room leaks every time it rains." Evelyn nodded, jotting things down on a notepad. She didn't interrupt. She didn't deflect. She absorbed. Jake watched from the back, his chest swelling not just with pride, but with something deeper validation. This is how it should be, he thought. This is how dignity starts, by listening. Then Evelyn turned to Jake. "Jake," she said, "you've been here the longest. You've seen this place at its worst. What would you change if you had no restrictions?" Jake stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'd build a culture where no one feels invisible," he said, "where maintenance isn't treated like a background process but part of the experience. Guests don't see us, but they feel what we do. Every light that works, every door that opens, every emergency that doesn't happen, that's because of this team. We deserve to be more than a line item on a spreadsheet." The room went quiet. Evelyn's eyes shimmered, but she blinked it back and smiled. That's the kind of answer that rewrites handbooks. She stepped forward and pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "This," she said, "is a signed executive order. Starting next quarter, we're increasing our facilities budget by 40%. We're implementing paid training for certifications, scheduling quarterly wellness reviews, and restructuring internal promotion pathways, so you don't need a business degree to move up, you just need integrity and proof of impact." A gasp rippled through the room. But Evelyn wasn't done. "And we're retiring the old staff evaluation format, replacing it with something we'll co-design with your input. Because who better to shape how success is measured than the ones delivering it?" For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the room erupted applause, echoing against the walls like thunder. Not polite, not obligatory, but earned. Jake looked at Evelyn. And that's when he saw it. A single tear. She turned slightly, brushing it away as if it didn't belong. But it did. And Jake knew it wasn't just the moment getting to her, it was the journey. From collapse to transformation. From being saved to leading with intention. After the meeting, as the room slowly emptied, Evelyn stepped outside for air. Jake followed. They stood side by side, overlooking the small courtyard beyond the loading dock. Light rain sprinkled the bricks. "You cried in there," Jake said gently. Evelyn didn't deny it. "I did." Jake looked at her sideways. Didn't think CEOs were allowed to do that." Evelyn chuckled. "They're not." But I stopped caring about aloud the day a man with grease on his face knelt in the mud and brought me back to life. They were quiet for a long moment. Then Evelyn turned to him, voice soft. "You know, that day when I woke up in the park, I didn't remember my title, or the company, or what flight I'd missed. I just remembered the sound of your voice counting, willing me back. That's what stayed." Jake didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing he could. "I'm glad you stayed." She met his eyes, the air between them humming with something unspoken. Not romance, not yet, but something that looked a lot like trust. A future forming not out of convenience but of respect and shared ground. "I meant what I said," she added, her voice stronger now. "You didn't just catch a failing wire that day, you caught me, and now I want to help build something that catches others before they fall." Jake nodded, the weight in his chest finally easing. "Then let's build it." And just like that, with rain falling softly around them and the echoes of applause still lingering in the walls, two people who had once been strangers separated by job titles, social expectations, and sheer chance began to walk forward as equals. Not because of contracts, not because of obligation, but because sometimes the right people meet in the most unexpected ways and refuse to let go. It was just past sunrise when Jake and Sophie arrived at Tanglewood Park. The same park, the one with the winding trail, the old sycamores. The quiet spot where months ago a jogger collapsed and a single act of instinct had changed the course of not just one life, but two. Now the path was washed in golden light. Autumn leaves fluttered across the ground like blessings scattered by the wind. Jake held a thermos of coffee in one hand, Sophie's hand in the other. She wore her favorite blue coat and a paper crown she'd made in class for Hero Day. "I told them my dad's the best kind of hero," Sophie said, swinging their hands. "The kind who fixes stuff. Not just machines, but people too." Jake chuckled. "That's a pretty high bar, kiddo." "You met it," she said simply. They turned the bend, and there she was. Evelyn stood beneath a tree hair down scarf fluttering in the breeze. In her hands, she held a folded picnic blanket and a bag of muffins she'd insisted on baking herself. She waved when she saw them. Jake felt something quiet bloom in his chest, not the pounding adrenaline of CPR, not the weight of stress or doubt, but peace. Earned. Lived. Real. They greeted one another the way people do when words have long since been replaced by trust. Evelyn knelt to hug Sophie, then handed her a blueberry muffin the size of her fist. "Baked from scratch," she said proudly. Sophie took a bite and nodded approvingly, cheeks full. "You could open a bakery." "Don't tempt me," Evelyn said, laughing. They laid the blanket down near the edge of the hill where they could see the city waking in the distance, rooftops catching light windows blinking on lives unfolding. Jake sipped his coffee and leaned back on one arm. "It's strange," he said. "I walk this trail almost every week, but I never stop here." Evelyn glanced at him. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Felt like I was always running to or from something." She nodded slowly. And now Jake looked around the quiet, the piece his daughter playing with fallen leaves, her laughter bright against the morning stillness. "Now, I think, maybe I've arrived." Evelyn didn't say anything. She reached for his hand. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration. Just two people sitting in the stillness of a second chance at work, at life, at love. The kind of second chance you don't chase, but receive. The kind you only recognize when you've lost something first. Back at the hotel, the change was palpable. The facilities team had a renovated workspace complete with ergonomic stations and natural lighting. The staff now wore name badges with not just their positions but a line beneath that read, "Team Member," "Culture Builder," "Backbone." Guests noticed. Reviews improved. But more importantly, morale soared. Jake oversaw the new mentorship program pairing experienced technicians with younger hires. His evenings were spent with Sophie attending her school play, helping her build solar system models out of papier-mâché. Evelyn continued leading not from a pedestal, but from the ground. She walked the hallways daily, asked for names, listened for real answers. She cried less, but when she did, it wasn't from pain. It was from joy, fulfillment, and sometimes from disbelief that a fall on a cold morning had become the foundation of something lasting. One evening in late winter, Jake returned home to find Sophie sitting at the kitchen table writing something with intense concentration. She looked up and beamed. "I'm writing a story for school," she said. "It's called The Man Who Brought People Back to Life." Jake smiled, hanging up his jacket. "Sounds like science fiction." She shook her head. "It's not. It's about you." He froze. "Because you didn't just bring her back," Sophie said softly. "You brought you back. And me too." Jake sat across from her, heart full. "I don't know what to say to that," he murmured. "Just keep being you," she replied, simple as breath. A few weeks later, Evelyn invited Jake and Sophie to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly renamed building annex. They thought it would be something small. It wasn't. Banners waved, staff gathered, reporters snapped photos. And then Evelyn stepped forward and pulled away the black cloth covering the new bronze plaque. The Miller Wing. Dedicated to resilience, humility, and the quiet heroes who make everything work. Jake stared at the name. His name. Tears stung his eyes. "I didn't know," he whispered. Evelyn took his hand. "You never asked for recognition," she said, "which is exactly why you deserve it." Sophie stood beside them, holding his other hand. She looked up and whispered, "Told you. Hero." As the crowd dispersed and the sunlight dipped behind the rooftops, Jake stood at the edge of the plaza, watching the name gleam in the fading light. He thought back to the morning of the park. The moment he ran. The breath he gave. The hand he held. And how it had all come back to him in ways he could never have imagined. Not just a job, not just a second chance, but a purpose, a partnership, a life. And in that golden hour glow he finally understood. Sometimes it's not the breath you take that saves you. It's the one you give. The breath that changed everything.